Welcome to Taste the Mango and another one of our videos where we're going to do an exploration into a core question behind non-duality. Now, today, Katrijn and I decided we wanted to look at something that may feel a little bit wide and will need a little bit of pointing out to in language as well as experiencing experientially. And the question is, what is the mind? Now, as you even hear that, there's going to be hundreds of different ways that we could look at that phrase. So we're going to need to put a little bit of distinction into it. So Katrijn, do you want to start us off by pulling apart a couple of the elements that we want this inquiry, when we get into it, to demonstrate?
Yeah, and just to frame it a little bit, when we talk about inquiry, we're often saying we're looking at beyond the mind, or before the mind, or before the psychological, or before psychology. So many times there's this sort of assumption that we know what we're talking about when we say look before the mind or beyond the mind. And it gets confusing because the word mind is used in different ways. But what we want to look at here is there something called my personal mind? So which many people would assume is located in the brain, or it's in my head somewhere. And of course, we can distinguish consciousness, universal mind. Some people speak of mind in that way, but I think most people listening to this, when they hear the word mind, they think of, body, mind, and that's my personal mind.
Yeah.
And then there are various theories about what the mind, how it works, different systems in the brain, Freudian psychology and theories of mind. But we want to really look at just this idea that I have, this body has a personal mind. And how do we know that? How do we know that that exists?
So we're going to look at to see whether there is this, if you can ever find what we would call a personal my mind. And we also want to look at the different ways what turns up in awareness does, and how we can then confuse that, thinking they're different things to each other. So, for example, I was always taught, and many people were conditioned this way, that there's a conscious mind and a subconscious mind. So there might be visible thoughts that I have that I can identify and go, well, there's a thought. Oh, that's definitely my mind. But then there's other things that live in my subconscious that are still influencing what I perceive and behave, but I'm not cognitively aware of them. And then that's different to the stuff that shows it visibly. And then that might be different to what we're calling awareness, which is big mind or universal mind or consciousness or whatever it is. So automatically, regardless of the psychological theory you've got, and that could complicate it even more, we have been taught there are separate parts of the human experience that are not all the same system. So maybe we'll give this a little go experientially, and then we'll kind of do a timeout and a bit of description or explanation on what was going on. So, Katrijn, do you want to start by asking me some questions, and I'll do the inquiry and you ask me the questions?
Yeah, so if you were to look for your mind, where would you look?
Sort of what's in front of my mind's eye, which is what's appearing to me in perception right now, which would be a screen, a light, my hands if I do this. That would be my mind. And then the thoughts I have, I can hear my voice. That's all where I'd looked. So what's going on? I would look to what's going on for me.
Mm. And then kind of implied, I think, is that's internal to you within the body.
So some things would be internal, like a thought that I could hear. Some things I would, I've been taught to call the outside world, like my screen and my, and sounds. But centered around the body, yes.
Mm. Okay, so the exact location is not very clear.
But me centric. I mean, I wouldn't think that what's going on in Israel right now has anything to do with my mind.
Yeah. So there's a locality to it.
Yeah, it feels like there is. Yeah.
Yeah.
It could appear to be.
And you just described two aspects, sort of sensations or perceptions, sense perceptions, and mental content, thinking, ideas.
Mm.
Maybe we can add, inspiration, daydreams, different.
Yeah, so sometimes my experience might be very, what I would say, literal to the here and now. That's what it would look like. So, okay, there's a screen, I'm seeing the screen, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes I might get a thought that would appear more random, like it would come from some, I just had a great thought. You know what we could do? We could do this in this video. So it would feel like it came from somewhere else. Still sort of me, but not quite so attached to the logic of what I was doing, maybe.
Mm. So, and we can imagine that, I don't know, someone with schizophrenia would have, visions or hear other voices, and still this would be the content of their minds.
Yeah, absolutely. So you go, and you might even, when they start talking about it, you might think, what, where they got that from? So yeah, so my mind would feel like their mind didn't get on, my mind and them.
Yeah. And so there's a clear difference between the content of what I call my mind, and then you or someone else telling me.
Yeah, it would definitely appear like there's a difference between my mind and someone else's mind.
Okay, so if we take this content of the mind, right, thoughts, sensations, visions, schizophrenic visions, anything that is possible, beyond that content, can you find anything that you can call the mind?
Well, there is what's there when the activity of that content isn't there.
Yeah.
And I recognize that.
So if we just use these words as a little bit of a help, there's the content of the mind, let's call that the content, and then there's the container.
Or the capacity in the content. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
yes, definitely.
And when we say my mind, we're sort of assuming that the container is this personal mind.
Well, I would have used to have said that, most definitely. I kind of now know a little different, because
exactly. Why or how? How do you know?
Well, because I can't find an edge. There's lots of ways, but I can't, for example, find an edge to my container.
Yes.
So if it was my container, surely it would start and stop and be finite. Whereas the container, the capacity, is never ever not there. So it doesn't stop in time, it doesn't stop in space. It's completely continuous. And it's not mine because it doesn't share the same qualities as what my thinking or my perceiving is. And it doesn't really care about them either. So the capacity, the container, doesn't get damaged or put off by what the content is. So it doesn't actually feel like mine at all, apart from the thought that comes in and goes, is that not yours? But, it doesn't feel like it at all. No, they feel really quite distinct.
the question that immediately comes up is that, but then why do we only know our personal thoughts?
Yeah.
The container not know all thoughts.
Yeah. And the way I would look at that is there's an individuation to what turns up in awareness that I have attention of.
Mm-hmm.
That's individuated. I don't have 7 billion people's thoughts, thank God. I'd be very busy if I did. Occasionally you get a real instinctive sense that you know what someone else is thinking. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. But sometimes you feel like you can cross that veil. But just because it's individuated does not mean it's separate.
Mm.
The two might correlate, but one doesn't cause the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I go back to the whirlpool in the water. It's so just because I don't have the same thoughts as someone else, but then I see someone else is also part of my content. So where would that ever? I would have to then make a separation about the other person being separate for me to have a separate mind as well.
Yeah. I think it's helpful maybe to take a step back, because we assume my mind is in my body.
Yeah.
Right? It's it's body mind.
Yes.
And so as soon as we assume that I am the separate body mind,
Yeah.
it becomes personal.
Yes, because on that theory, if I was standing next to someone, I maybe would have their thoughts. But I couldn't have the thoughts of someone in America right now. Because if body is the house, houses the mind, then it will be linked to that. Whereas remote viewing, our experience of people have remote viewing where they can view something in another location that their body isn't in.
Mm-hmm.
And in dreams, we're very good at that. And in imagination, we're very good at that. But we've been taught that in waking reality, that doesn't happen.
Yes, and we're assuming that we're in the body.
Yeah, because we're assuming we're in the body. I mean, we see
Yes.
that's why it doesn't happen. We go, oh, that doesn't happen because we're in the body. Not for any of the thousands of reasons of that why that wouldn't happen. So
if we turn it around to what we explore in these videos, and we say there is an infinite consciousness mind, an eternal awareness in which all content appears, including the body mind that calls itself Piers.
Mm-hmm.
Then we could say that the idea of the personal mind is also something appearing within that body mind.
But yeah, because the idea that of me and me being a body mind is an appearance, just like a thought about, oh, I had a nice lunch.
Yeah.
And it comes and goes. I mean, it's a more consistent one than lunch, but it has exactly the same qualities as any other thought.
Yes.
Apart from being a little more consistent. So it's not fundamental. It's once you look, I can see it's not fundamental. It's an idea.
It's an added concept that we had to. I mean, you ask a small child, it doesn't know anything about a mind, about a personal mind. It just knows raw sensations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so going back to the beginning of this discussion, if we look just at raw sense data, can we find anything that we could call my personal mind?
So if I go to raw sense data without any conditioning or assumptions or correlation making, then you can't, bizarre as it may sound, you can't actually find anything my mind, apart from a thought that you've had this condition saying my mind and body. Apart from that, which appears,
mm-hmm.
You cannot find it. You wherever you look, you can't find it, apart from it being a thought.
Yes.
And we have thoughts about all sorts of things, we don't believe them. So just because it's a thought doesn't mean it's fundamental. So you can't actually find it, and it's the bizarrest thing not to be able to find, because you would assume you can, but when you look in this way of an inquiry, you're like, actually, I can't, and you almost can't believe you can't find it. It's not there. Really, really isn't. In raw experience, it is just not there.
So if we drop the concept of my mind, and even just the concept of mind in general, what is there?
There's just the coming and going of thought, feeling, and perception. Some of those, if you put the conditioning back in, would be like, well, they're mine, and some of them wouldn't. But if you didn't have the conditioning of mind, they're all the same. They're all just an arising of psychological content and a dissolving.
Yes.
A content coming and going in a container.
And
there's no specialized my stuff. Yeah. So they can appear to be localized to the body mind. They can appear to be self-referential to my life because they're relevant. So that's just due to the system. So all the appearances of my mind, or it being my mind from a body perspective, is dotted line. There's nothing solid in that.